Clara Wilson stared at the envelope in her hands, the elegant script making her heart race. It was an invitation to her parents' 30th wedding anniversary, a celebration that promised laughter, music, and the gathering of people she hadn't seen in years. Excitement danced in her chest, but it was tangled with a heavy knot of anxiety. Clara had been looking forward to this night, imagining the joy of seeing her parents happy, yet a quiet fear lingered at the edge of her mind. She thought about her life since starting her own handmade jewelry business. It had been a journey full of early mornings and late nights, of sketches turned into pieces, of dreams whispered to herself in the dark of her tiny apartment. Each bracelet, necklace, and ring carried a piece of her soul, yet she knew the world outside her little studio didn't always see the value in such passion. People often called her work small or just a hobby, words that echoed in her mind as she tried to muster confidence. The invitation felt heavier than it should have. Clara worried about the glances, the whispers, the quiet judgment that could fall from people who thought success meant a corner office or a corporate title. She imagined Linda and Greg, family friends who had always been subtly competitive, with their polite smiles and sharp eyes, ready to dissect and compare achievements. Even though her parents were loving and proud, Clara feared that night would be a test of her worth, a mirror held up to all the insecurities she tried to hide. The days leading up to the anniversary were filled with restless preparation. Clara spent hours choosing an outfit that felt just right, something elegant but not overdone, something that said she belonged without screaming for attention. She brushed her hair until it shone, rehearsed polite greetings and small talk, and double-checked the small gift she had picked for her parents. It was a delicate bracelet, handcrafted, meant to show her appreciation for their years of guidance and love. Still, each step of preparation carried a whisper of fear. Would they see her as successful, or would they dismiss her dreams as trivial? On the day of the anniversary, the city felt different, almost as if it sensed her nervous energy. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting golden light across streets and buildings, but Clara barely noticed. Her mind raced with questions and doubts, replaying past encounters where her accomplishments had been minimized. She recalled the day she had shown her first collection to her parents' friends, the polite nods and forced smiles that barely hid amusement or disinterest. That memory stung anew. As she drove to the venue, Clara took deep breaths, trying to steady her nerves. She reminded herself why she had started her business in the first place, for the love of creating, for the thrill of seeing her ideas come to life, and for the hope that one day her work could touch more people. Yet, beneath that reminder, a flicker of fear remained. What if tonight, surrounded by everyone's eyes and subtle judgments, all her pride crumbled? Pulling up to the hall, Clara saw the elegant decorations and the soft glow of lights inside. The music drifted out to meet her, and the laughter and chatter inside made her chest tighten. She stepped out of her car, clutching her small gift and her purse, feeling both anticipation and a heavy wave of anxiety. Each step toward the entrance felt like stepping into a battlefield where the weapons were not swords or guns, but smirks, whispers, and quiet comparisons. Inside, the grandeur of the hall took her breath away. Crystal chandeliers reflected light like tiny stars, tables were adorned with flowers and candles, and the soft hum of conversation filled the room. Clara's parents greeted her with warm hugs and bright smiles, their pride in her still palpable despite her own fears. She returned their hugs, her heart squeezing with a mixture of love and apprehension. Scanning the room, Clara tried to spot familiar faces, but her eyes immediately landed on those she feared most. Linda was there, impeccably dressed, her smile sharp and calculating. Greg stood beside her, nodding and chatting with other guests but always aware, always observing. Clara felt her stomach twist, a familiar knot of tension forming as she realized they would soon know about her business. Would they ridicule her? Would her parents' pride be enough to shield her from the sting of judgment? Clara took a deep breath, telling herself that she had worked hard, that her business was a reflection of her creativity and determination. But even as she tried to anchor herself, the fear lingered, whispering doubts in her ear. She felt exposed, standing at the threshold of a room where her achievements might be belittled, and she couldn't shake the feeling that tonight would test her in ways she hadn't anticipated. And so, with a mixture of hope and apprehension, Clara stepped fully into the hall, ready to celebrate her parents' love, yet bracing herself for the silent war of judgment and mockery she feared would follow. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she stepped into the glittering hall, the soft hum of conversation washing over her like a tide. The room was alive with laughter and music, couples moving gracefully across the dance floor, and groups gathered around tables, their voices blending into a warm buzz. Despite the festive atmosphere, Clara's chest felt tight, her nerves screaming at her to retreat to a quiet corner. She scanned the crowd, trying to spot familiar faces. Her parents were at the center of attention, smiling and greeting friends who had traveled from near and far. They radiated happiness, and Clara felt a pang of both joy and anxiety. She wanted to share in their celebration fully, but the fear of judgment lingered, whispering reminders of the subtle ridicule she had faced in the past. Clara's eyes landed on Linda and Greg across the room. They were perfectly poised, their eyes sharp and observant, their smiles polite but calculating. Just seeing them made Clara's stomach churn. She recalled past dinners and gatherings where Linda's comments had carried a sting masked as humor and Greg's nods had weighed heavier than words. She knew tonight would be no different. Taking a deep breath, Clara adjusted the strap of her purse and walked toward the area where her parents' friends had gathered. Each step felt deliberate, as though she were stepping onto a stage without knowing the script. Her small handmade jewelry business, something she poured her heart into, felt like a fragile secret she carried in her pocket. What would they think? Would they dismiss her efforts, mock her passion, or worse, laugh at her in subtle, cutting ways? Clara's parents greeted her warmly, enveloping her in hugs that were both reassuring and grounding. "We're so glad you're here, Clara," her mother whispered, her eyes sparkling with pride. Her father added, "It wouldn't be the same without you." Their words were a balm, but the weight of the room's expectations still pressed down on her. As Clara navigated through the clusters of guests, polite smiles plastered on her face, she felt the undercurrent of scrutiny. Conversations paused briefly as she passed, and whispers fluttered around her, just loud enough to send her heart into a faster rhythm. She kept her chin high, reminding herself of the hours, days, and months she had dedicated to building her business. Each piece of jewelry represented a story, a dream, a small victory over doubt. Then, the moment she had feared most approached. Someone mentioned her business casually, a seemingly innocent question that could turn into a test of her confidence. Clara felt her pulse quicken. She forced herself to smile, preparing to answer, ready to defend the work she loved. The room seemed to hold its breath, a delicate, tense silence enveloping her as all eyes subtly shifted toward her. Even in the midst of the celebration, Clara felt the weight of every judgment, real or imagined. She wanted to melt into the background, to disappear into the soft glow of the chandeliers, but she also wanted to stand tall, to let her hard work speak for itself. Each second stretched, the anticipation heavy on her shoulders, until finally, she found herself leaning on her parents for support, reminding herself that her value wasn't determined by their opinions. Despite the swirling tension, Clara noticed moments of genuine warmth. A friend she hadn't seen in years smiled at her with admiration, and her cousin's encouraging nod gave her a brief spark of confidence. Yet, the nervous energy never fully left her, a quiet drumbeat that kept her alert, aware that tonight would be remembered not just for her parents' love, but for the subtle battle of perception and pride she would have to navigate. Clara's moment of dread arrived faster than she expected. The conversation near the buffet table shifted, and all eyes seemed to tilt toward her. Greg, ever the critic, leaned slightly forward with a smirk, his voice carrying a subtle edge. "So, Clara, I hear you've started a little business." Her heart thudded in her chest. Clara nodded, forcing a smile. "Yes, I make handmade jewelry. It's been growing steadily." Linda chimed in, her tone dripping with amusement. "Oh, that's adorable. Tiny trinkets, right? Must be nice to call it a business." Her laugh was soft but cutting, and Clara felt the sting of embarrassment prick her cheeks. Clara's throat tightened. She had faced doubts before, but hearing them voiced so openly in front of her parents' friends made her feel small, exposed, and vulnerable. She glanced at her parents, whose expressions were a mix of pride and discomfort, trying to shield her without making the situation more tense. Greg tilted his head, feigning curiosity. "Do you actually make enough to call it a career? Or is it more like a hobby?" Clara swallowed hard, fighting the urge to shrink into herself. Her hands, normally steady, fidgeted with the strap of her purse. Each word from them felt like a tiny blow, each laugh a whisper of dismissal. She wanted to explain, to defend herself, but the room felt suffocating. The crowd's attention, though polite, weighed on her like a heavy curtain pressing down. She took a slow breath, reminding herself of the countless hours she had poured into her work, the designs she had created, and the small but loyal group of customers who loved her pieces. This was real. Her business was real. Yet, the voices of judgment echoed loudly in her mind, threatening to drown out her confidence. Clara's mother stepped forward subtly, resting a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Clara's work is beautiful," she said softly, her voice carrying pride and reassurance. "She's built something special." For a moment, Clara felt a flicker of strength. She nodded gratefully to her mother, trying to reclaim her composure. But Linda and Greg were relentless, their whispers and amused glances creating an invisible barrier that Clara felt trapped behind. She excused herself, moving toward a quieter corner of the hall. Each step was heavy, the weight of humiliation pressing down. She leaned against a wall, closed her eyes briefly, and let herself feel the disappointment, embarrassment, and frustration. It was a cocktail of emotions she hadn't anticipated when she first started this journey. The sting of mockery cut deep, leaving her questioning herself in a way she hadn't in years. Yet, even as doubt clawed at her, a small ember of determination flickered inside. Clara reminded herself that these people didn't define her, that their laughter and judgment couldn't diminish the value of her work or her dreams. She breathed deeply, steadying herself, knowing that this moment, painful as it was, would not break her. It was merely a test of resilience, a challenge to her belief in her own worth and the path she had chosen. Clara stood in the corner of the hall, her back pressed against the wall, feeling the noise and laughter of the party blur into a distant hum. Her mind replayed every word Linda and Greg had said, every smirk and side glance, until she felt as if she were shrinking inside herself. The pride she had carried for her jewelry business now seemed fragile, almost laughable, in the glow of the grand celebration and the whispered judgments. Her fingers absent-mindedly traced the edge of her bracelet, the gift she had brought for her parents. It was meant to celebrate their years of love, yet at that moment, it felt like a symbol of her own inadequacy. She questioned every decision she had made, every sleepless night spent crafting designs, every effort to turn her passion into something more. Was it enough? Did it matter in the eyes of others? Clara's parents approached her cautiously, sensing her discomfort. "You're doing amazing, Clara," her father said gently, but she could see the worry in his eyes. "Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Her mother nodded, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder, and Clara felt a warmth of love that contrasted sharply with the cold sting of criticism she had endured. But even with their support, the doubts gnawed at her relentlessly. She thought of all the people in the room, those who measured success by wealth, status, and public recognition. Her small business, her dreams, her creations, they seemed insignificant against the backdrop of such expectations. Clara's chest tightened, her breath catching as a wave of fear and insecurity washed over her. She found herself imagining a life where she had chosen a different path, a more conventional career, one that would have earned nods of approval and admiration without effort. The thought made her heart ache. She had worked so hard to build something unique, something personal, and yet here, surrounded by scrutiny and judgment, it felt as though her accomplishments were invisible, trivialized. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, trying to center herself. She reminded herself of the early mornings in her small studio, the joy of seeing her designs come to life, the satisfaction of a customer's praise, and the quiet confidence that had grown within her over months of persistence. This was real, and it was hers. The opinions of others could not erase her effort, her talent, or her ambition. Still, the internal struggle persisted, a battle between pride and doubt. Each whisper, each laugh, threatened to unravel her composure. She felt small, uncertain, and raw, but beneath that vulnerability, a spark of determination flickered. Clara knew she couldn't let this moment define her. The evening had become more than a celebration of her parents' love, it was a test of her resilience and belief in herself. As she stood there, Clara made a silent promise to herself. No matter the judgment, no matter the mockery, she would continue to pursue her dreams. She would prove to herself, first and foremost, that her work mattered. The path ahead was uncertain, but she would walk it with the quiet strength that had carried her this far, holding on to the knowledge that she was capable, talented, and deserving of success, regardless of what anyone else thought. Just when Clara felt she might collapse under the weight of embarrassment and self-doubt, her phone buzzed in her purse. She pulled it out with trembling hands, her heart skipping a beat at the sight of Ryan's name, her CFO. Seeing it brought a spark of relief. Ryan was always calm, practical, and encouraging, a voice of reason in her chaotic world. She answered, her voice slightly shaky. "Hello, Clara. I have news you're going to love," Ryan said, his tone bubbling with excitement. Clara's stomach twisted with curiosity and apprehension. She had learned to expect important calls, but this felt different, urgent yet hopeful. "What is it?" she asked cautiously, trying to hide the quiver in her voice. "There's an investor who has been following your work for months. They're ready to discuss a partnership that could take your business national. They want to meet immediately. Clara, this is huge." For a moment, Clara couldn't speak. Her chest felt tight, and then a rush of emotion flooded her, shock, relief, and a renewed sense of pride. The very business that had been mocked, dismissed, and belittled in the hall tonight was now being recognized for its potential and value. Her small venture, her passion, her hard work, they mattered more than anyone in that room could ever understand. Clara gripped the phone tightly, trying to steady herself. "Are you serious?" she whispered, almost afraid to believe it. "Absolutely. I wouldn't call if it wasn't real. This is your moment, Clara. You've earned it," Ryan replied firmly. His words grounded her, reminding her that success was not measured by whispers or smirks but by results, by opportunity, and by perseverance. A surge of excitement replaced her earlier fear. Clara felt the tension in her shoulders ease, a smile breaking across her face despite the lingering unease from the party. She realized that she didn't need approval from those who mocked her. Validation had arrived in a form she hadn't expected, and it was more meaningful than any comment or judgment. She took a deep breath, holding onto the phone and the news like a lifeline. The humiliation she had felt moments before now seemed distant, almost trivial compared to the future opening before her. Clara knew this was more than a business opportunity, it was a chance to prove to herself that her work mattered, that her dreams were valid, and that her determination could triumph over doubt. For the first time that evening, Clara felt a rush of genuine confidence. The whispers of mockery, the piercing glances, the tiny jabs, they no longer had the power to define her. Her heart swelled with hope, and a quiet thrill ran through her veins. This was the turning point she had been waiting for, the moment when her small business, her labor of love, stepped out from the shadows and into the light of recognition. Clara returned to the party, her posture transformed, her smile now carrying a quiet confidence. The music and laughter still swirled around her, but she felt untouchable, strengthened by the call from Ryan and the opportunity it had brought. The earlier humiliation seemed like a distant shadow, replaced by a radiant sense of pride. She approached her parents, who immediately noticed the change in her demeanor. Her mother's eyes sparkled with curiosity and hope, and her father gave a subtle nod of encouragement. Clara took a deep breath and shared the news about the investor, her voice steady and excited. Their faces lit up with joy, pride, and a touch of astonishment. The room seemed to shift around her, the whispers of mockery replaced by murmurs of surprise and admiration. Linda and Greg were among the first to notice. Their polite smirks faltered as Clara explained the scale of the opportunity and the recognition her business had received. The laughter that had once pierced her heart now felt awkward in the face of undeniable success. Clara noticed a flicker of respect in their eyes, though unspoken, and it warmed her heart to realize she no longer sought their approval. Clara's steps were lighter as she mingled with the guests, sharing bits of her story and answering questions about her business. Each conversation reinforced the shift in the room's energy. She saw nods of admiration, smiles of encouragement, and genuine interest, all affirming the value of her efforts. The very project that had seemed small and insignificant to some now drew attention, curiosity, and respect. As the evening continued, Clara felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She had faced ridicule, doubt, and fear, yet she had emerged stronger, proving to herself first and foremost that her hard work and talent mattered. The party, which had begun as a source of anxiety, had transformed into a celebration of resilience, determination, and the quiet triumph of pursuing one's dreams. By the time the night wound down, Clara stood with her parents, looking out at the room filled with friends and family. She felt an overwhelming gratitude not just for the recognition, but for the journey itself. Every challenge, every whispered mockery, every moment of self-doubt had shaped her, preparing her to embrace this moment fully. Clara realized that success wasn't about the approval of others, it was about believing in herself, trusting her path, and daring to shine even when others failed to see her light.